As I just mentioned, it is in fact possible to do a certain amount of audio playback in your .NET applications without using mAudio at all. So let's have a quick look at a couple of different techniques for doing that. The first one is a class that was introduced in .NET version 2. It's system.media.soundPlayer. And what this allows you to do is to play back WAV files. These WAV files can be from a file on your disk, it can be from an embedded resource in your application, or from a URL. And it's got some fairly rudimentary controls. You can play and stop, and you can also loop. It doesn't give you any access to the volume control, and it doesn't allow you to reposition. Probably this would be most useful if you were making a game and you just wanted to do a few sound effects. Let's have a quick look at SoundPlayer in action. So here you can see I've created a very simple Windows Forms application with a single button on it. When we click on the button, we create a new SoundPlayer object. We set its sound location, and here I've set it to a file that's in the same directory as my executable, and then we call play. And that's all there is to it. If we run this application, click play, you'll hear the sound. Sound location can point to any WAV file. What it can't do, unfortunately, is MP3 files. If we do this, we'll get an exception. Sound location is also able to point at a URL, but the fact that it only supports WAV files makes this feature of limited use. If you don't want to point to a file or a URL, you can actually pass it a stream, using the soundplayer.stream property. As well as play, you can also call play looping. This will keep playing your WAV file again and again, so you will need to explicitly call stop. And as I said, unfortunately, there is no way of setting the volume. Volume property doesn't exist. So while this class might be useful if you're just interested in playing some very simple sound effects, if you're doing anything more complicated with audio playback, it probably won't be sufficient for your needs. There is another class that was added to the .NET framework for playing back audio in .NET version 3, and that's the media element control, which is part of WPF. The media element control is able to play back audio and video files, and it's much more powerful than SoundPlayer. It can play back a whole variety of different types of audio file, such as WAV files, MP3 files, and they can be played from local files on your hard disk or streamed from URLs. It also gives some additional control, such as the ability to reposition in the file while you're playing back and to adjust the volume. And if you're using Silverlight, there's an equivalent control that you can use in Silverlight. So if you need to do audio playback in Silverlight, this is where you want to look. Let's have a quick look at a demonstration of Media Element in action in a WPF application. Here you can see I've created a very simple WPF application. And in my main window, I've got 4 elements inside the grid. The first is the media element. And you can see here I've given it a name so that we can access it in the code behind, but I've set its visibility to collapsed. When we're only playing audio, we don't need this to be visible. It's only if you're playing video with the media element that you would need this to take up some space on your GUI. I've also added 3 buttons, one to start playing, one to stop, and one to rewind while we're playing, so that I can demonstrate the repositioning feature. Let's have a look at the code behind the play button. What I'm doing here is when you press play, I'm setting the source of the media element to a URL. In this case, I'm just playing a local file on my hard disk, so I've set it to demo.mp3 and said that this is a relative URL. Now, by default, the media element will automatically start playing as soon as it's loaded that file. However, you can adjust this and set the loaded behaviour to manual, in which case you'll need to call play. And you might even want to call play when the loaded event fires. One of the useful things about the loaded event, particularly for something like MP3s, is you can then use that to show some information about the file. such as the artist's name or the duration of the file. And you can see here I can also adjust the volume. Setting it to 0.5 sets the volume to 50%. The stop button is fairly self-explanatory. When you click stop, we'll call stop on the media element. And the rewind button is also very simple. Media element has a position property that's conveniently in timespan format. So setting it to timespan.0 rewinds us back to the beginning of the file. Let's have a quick look at this in action. I'll start it up, I'll play, I'll rewind while we're playing, and then I'll stop. So as you can see, Media Element has a pretty good feature set, and it may be for your application, it does everything you need. In fact, the real reason that you'd want to use mAudio instead of Media Element is if you want access to the raw samples and to be doing some processing on the audio as it's playing. That's something that Media Element isn't going to allow you to do. Before we move on to look at mAudio, I'll just briefly mention one other way of playing back audio without using mAudio. And that's that the Windows Media Player can be embedded in your application as an ActiveX control. In many ways it's got very similar capabilities to Media Element. But if you're working with Windows Forms instead of WPF, for example, this might be a good way to go.